Hey guys, let's go there. Were Darrell Brooks' crimes at the parade massacre hate crimes? Should he have been charged for hate crimes? Why wasn't he charged for hate crimes? Don't we know it was a hate crime? I know there's some strong opinions on that, and I want to examine what we know from the evidence and what the considerations could have been for charging or not charging him for hate crimes. Was it evidence-based? Was it political? What was going on there? And we're not going to know all the answers to that, but we do have some clues. So first, let's talk about, well, what are we talking about hate crimes? So there can be federal and state hate crimes. The first we'll look at is the Wisconsin hate crime statute, which is for penalties. It's not really for crime per se. It's an increased penalty, an adder for hate crime. And it basically says if you do all the following, then your underlying crime penalty is increased. And that is you commit a crime, but the main thing is intentionally selecting the person against who the crime is committed, or you select the property that is damaged, in whole or in part because of the actor's belief or perception regarding the race, religion, color, disability, sexual orientation, national origin, or ancestry of that person, or the owner or occupant of that property, whether or not you were correct in your belief. If you do all that, then they can have an adder. And in that case, the jury would be given a special verdict form to find these things. And if so, and it was a felony, for a felony, it can add on 5 years. Now, is that really going to make a big difference in Brooks' case? Probably not. And maybe that's a factor in this. We'll talk about that. But that's what happens under Wisconsin state law. You commit a crime, and then if the state perceives that it violates this statute, then they can add that for special verdict, and you could face an increased penalty for the crime that you committed if you did it for the reasons that I just said. The federal law has a series of hate crimes. That's different, right? The federal law prosecuting you is different than the state prosecuting you. But let's look at one that would be used in a situation like this. Whoever willfully causes bodily injury to any person, or through the use of fire, firearm, dangerous weapon, explosive, attempts to cause bodily injury to any person because of the actual or perceived race, color, religion, or national origin of any person, then you get these penalties. And if you kill somebody, then you can go to jail for life. So that's the federal statute. So the notion is, did Darrell Brooks kill the people at the parade because they were white? I mean, that's the angle, right? A lot of people believe that's obvious. Some people believe maybe it's true. I'm sure some people think, no, that's not. He just did it because he did it. And we'll look at what we've got for that and what the ramifications of bringing a hate crime charge are. Okay, those are the statutes we'll talk about. Let's get off into the opinion here for just a moment, which is that for me, hate crime statutes are kind of iffy because there's the laudable goal that people shouldn't be selected for characteristics, things about them, and subjected to violence for those reasons. And I don't want that to happen. You don't want that to happen. But there's also the notion that if you beat somebody, or let's say you murder somebody because you don't like their skin color, is that really worse than if you murder somebody just because you wanted to take their money? Or just because there's something wrong with you and you like killing people? How's it worse? Like, why shouldn't we punish the behavior rather than the motive? Because motive isn't normally an issue in a crime anyway. And that's a fair criticism. And I think it's also fair to say society, though, can select out certain conduct and say, hey, if it's for this reason, we're going to make this especially bad for you, hey, criminal. I don't necessarily buy that exactly, but I can understand that logic. The problem is, because you're dealing with intent and you're dealing with certain groups rather than a particular behavior, there's the idea that statutes can be used selectively, that they're not enforced equally across races, regardless of intent, that they're used for political purposes to inflame things or to score points politically, and they're not really carefully evaluated all the time for whether the person who was committing the crime had a motive against this other race, but rather really when it hits the news and it's convenient, we really want to put the screws on or make the news, that's when we'll do it. That's a perception about these kind of statutes with a lot of people, and I get that too, because I believe that is certainly the case sometimes. So I think the statute is on the bubble for that in terms of how much good does it do compared to does it also contribute to tensions between people? I don't know. On the other hand, if you're killing people, I really don't care what happens to you. They can put you away for whatever they want to put you away for. Good luck, goodbye, see you later, whatever your bad reason was. So I don't feel sorry for the people who were hurting people who also get prosecuted under the statute. Screw you is my view towards those people. That is not to say that I think it should be political, but hot potato like it often is. All right, opinion mode is going to go off a little bit, and let's get back into what I'm talking about here, because this came up in the comments a lot. Like Darrell Brooks, this was a hate crime. Why wasn't this charged with a hate crime? And several people mentioned, hey, they did it with Dylann Roof. That was a hate crime. Why didn't they do it with this guy? It's the same thing. That prompted me to go look at his case and read up on it, particularly his appeal at the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals for his federal convictions, and see what happened in that case and what the law was in that case, and is it really the same as Darrell Brooks, and how understanding the Dylann Roof case could bring some understanding to whether it was the right or wrong thing to not charge Darrell Brooks with a hate crime in his case. Dylann Roof, if you remember, was the low-life, absolute scumbag disaster of a human being who went into the church in Charleston, which he selected because it was a church that had African Americans in it, black people in it, who welcomed him in, despite the fact that he was a different color than the other people who were there, shared their love with him, shared their religion and faith with him in absolute good faith and open arms, and he repaid that by murdering these people. So he's total scum. I'm sorry that he wasn't shot when he was being arrested. That unfortunately didn't happen. I had no sympathy for this guy. Just another example of the worst kind of people that people can be. And the unfortunate fact is he claimed to be a white supremacist, and you may be able to know through this video, although sometimes it looks orange. I'm still working on that. I'm white. So that's terrible for me, because I don't want to be this. Anything that he can claim that I have in common with him, I don't like it. I have nothing in common with that guy. I wish he were dead. So sometimes he said he wished he were dead too. We'd have that in common if he could have lived up to it, but he didn't. All right, so let's look at what's the same, obviously the same, between Dylann Roof and Darrell Brooks. They both murdered people. That's true. They both murdered people of the other race. And that's true. That happened, right? So we got some big similarities there. They also both espoused racial hatred. Roof did that in public on social media, and so did Darrell Brooks. In Roof's case, he kept a website and a blog and posted all over the place about how much he hated black people, and if no one else was going to do it, he was going to do something about it, and terrible things about black people, and we need to do something about it, the we being whoever he thinks is on his team. It's not me. Needed to do something about it. It didn't occur to him when he says, I guess I'll have to be the one to do it, that maybe people aren't buying what you're selling here because you're complete garbage. How about that? So, I can understand the racism from this aspect, which is if you're a complete loser who can't accomplish anything in your own life, and all you can possibly do is look at another group of people who look somewhat different and think, well, if I can find some people who look like me who've done well, and then I can associate myself mentally with them, and then I can pretend that I'm better than these other people. That's all you got. That's all he had. And it wasn't enough to make him human, unfortunately. So he posted negative things about black people online. Now, Brooks, he did the same thing. And remember, this was back during this whole effort by the media to roil up the cities, to get people to be as angry against each other as they possibly could make that. Through some things that were true and some things that were false, constant stirring the pot to try and increase racial tension, and politicians jumped all over that wherever it worked to their benefit. And Brooks joined in that game. How much of it he believed, I don't know. He seems to be just a generally hateful person, but he definitely posted on his social media, which I'm trying to show some examples that I found, things that were specifically targeted toward white people and targeted towards violence against white people. He said that stuff. Also, he hates police. Not surprised there, because they were often inconveniencing him during his crime sprees, sometimes stopping him temporarily from hurting people, although he was pretty good at gaming the system and getting away with it later. So those are the three things that we have in common between them. They were racist in how they presented themselves to the world. They were violent and murderous scumbags, and they killed people who were different colors. But there is one big difference in their case, which is that Roof was subject to death penalty charges by the state and the federal government. And in the federal government, some of those charges were based on hate crime legislation. Also, and what he ultimately got the death penalty for were his use of the firearm, but also going against people as that were expressing their religion. He got death penalty for that. He didn't actually get it on the hate crime piece, but he was charged with that. And then Brooks was not charged with it. Why? Why did the DA in Wisconsin make a decision that, hey, I don't want to charge this guy with a hate crime because it might inflame the tensions that are already there? Did they decide, well, I don't want to do it because I don't want to do it to somebody who's this color against somebody who's that color? I know a lot of people believe that too. Was there a valid legal reason to not do it? And I urge you to keep your mind open to this last possibility, because that's what I'm going to examine from a legal standpoint, not discounting that it could have been any of those other reasons, because it is a politically useful tool to have that statute there. It's not always based on equity, fairness, or trying to apply the law equally. I of course, agree with that. But having said that, in my opinion, based on the evidence that we saw in the case, I think they did the right thing in the state case to not charge him with this hate crime adder. That's aside from the federal government. You think whatever you want about the federal government. I mean, to me, they're always motivated purely by politics and maintaining their own power. So throw them out the window. Whatever bad motives you want to ascribe to the federal government, you can have those. I'm going to talk about the state government here. So what he would have faced in the state charge is this adder of 5 years of a penalty. And given that he was facing almost 1,000 years of penalties and several life sentences in which he could be found not eligible for release, talked about that in the last video, those extra penalties really wouldn't be necessary to do something to him. They could maybe speak to the community that we're not gonna suffer hate of any type, any one race against any race. We're not gonna do that. And I know some people think, well, if you're gonna do these other cases, you should do this case. I hear that, but let's look at the difference between Roof and Brooks. So remember, whether you are charging a hate crime statute directly, like in the federal case with Roof, or whether you're adding this penalty on, which would have been the case in the Brooks state prosecution, you're adding something for the jury to find beyond a reasonable doubt during the trial. So now you are putting race at issue in the trial, and that can be appropriate. And I'm sticking to race, it can be these other things, but that can be appropriate. And it could also make your case more complicated and an extra burden of proof that you got to be dealing with and spin it off in a different direction. So again, I concede and agree that both these guys were racist, Roof and Brooks, right? They're cut in that degree, maybe perhaps a little bit from the same cloth, that are just hateful, worthless people. Join them up together in a We Are the World moment and give them the penalty that they both deserve together would suit me fine, but it won't happen. Anyway, they're both terrible. In my book, they're both awful. They're just awful. But in Roof's case, the government had to prove that he was motivated to kill the people he killed through the intent that would meet the hate crime statute. In this case, it was race. So let's talk about an abstract here for a minute. Let's say I hate banks. I just hate banks. And then somebody robs a bank. Does the fact that I said I hate banks mean that I robbed that bank? Those don't connect, right? Maybe if I even robbed a bank before, they're not going to let that be used as evidence that I robbed this bank. Because generally the evidence needs to connect you directly to the crime itself, right? Think about in Brooks' case, they didn't even talk about the fact that he had run over his girlfriend, who, by the way, was not white, she was black, shortly before he ran over the people at the parade. Because of these kind of limitations on evidence, that we need to focus on the actual crime that is alleged and the elements to prove it and the evidence pertaining directly to that. So if you were to add into the Brooks case as an element that has to be found beyond reasonable doubt that he was motivated by race, you would need to show that he targeted these people in this instance for being white, right? So let's look at how they did that for Roof in the case in South Carolina, where they did it because he chose to go against black people. So the government had a lot of evidence that Roof was racist, right? Because he wrote about it all the time, probably told everybody too. But they needed to show that that day when he went into the church to kill those people, that he was motivated by race, that's what he intended to do. And how did they connect those dots? Well, he helped them along by posting things on his website that day saying he was doing it for race. Okay, now that's helpful if you're the government. He also, when he was being interrogated, confessed to killing these people. He said he was guilty, that obviously he did the killing. He told them in his interrogation that he was a white nationalist, that he had to do it because black people are killing white people every day and raping white women. So he said to them, I killed these people and I had to do it because of the way black people are behaving in his perception. He also told them he did it because he wanted to bring attention to his cause and agitate race relations. And it causes friction and could lead to a race war. And he had said in his blog or whatever he kept that, hey, we got to do something about this. And if no one else is going to do it, I guess I'll just have to do it myself, he says. Not cluing into the fact that no one else is doing it because it's evil, right? It's evil. And of all the people to attack, you attack some of the finest people that the city had to offer. Just awful. And he said he targeted Charleston for his attack because of its historic importance. And he researched African-American churches in Charleston. And he chose the one he did because of its historic significance. He cased it first before doing that. So he said he issued a call to action. I think this was in his online junk, saying it was not too late to take America back. And by no means should we wait any longer to take drastic action. No one was doing anything but talking on the internet. Somebody has to have the bravery to take it to the real world. I guess that has to be me, he says. So that's what he did. Now, the government didn't have to use his generalized racism, that he was a guy that lived way out in a cabin in the middle of the forest somewhere, just hates other people or whatever. They didn't have to use that. And could they have? I don't know about that. What they needed to do was show that day in those acts when he was pulling the trigger that he was motivated by hate for this race. And he served that up on a silver platter in things he posted earlier that day. And then also what he told the investigators. So he made that element for them. So like hate crimes in terms of how they're applied or whether they exist or whatever or not, understand that the government was able to meet its burden of proof because the evidence existed for this, that yes, he did the crime and he did it for the motive necessary to support the hate crime. So fantastic case for the government, just absolutely phenomenal. And this guy ended up getting the justice he deserved, which is found guilty on everything. And then on some of the counts regarding religion and use of a firearm, he was sentenced to death for that. So in the Brooks case, was the evidence similar to the type that they had in the Roof case to support their hate crime allegation? Brooks didn't confess, right? Roof confessed to the investigators, yes, I killed these people. Brooks didn't do that. Roof said, I did it because of the color of their skin and because of the color of my skin. I attacked these people this day because of that. Brooks didn't confess to anything. He did not say anything about the motive for why he was running over people at the parade. Roof posted it online at the time of the attack that he was doing this. Brooks didn't do that. He had a generalized posting about violence well before that, but not about the parade itself, although I do get the logic of connecting those things. But again, Roof put it on a silver platter for these people. I committed this particular crime to attack people of a different race because of my racist beliefs. And it strikes me that the evidence in the Brooks case is that he didn't pre-plan this, although when I saw it happen, when the crime happened, I thought that's what it was. But I'm glad I got to see the case because it strikes me that day he was attacking his girlfriend again, who was someone he had run over before who was black, right? Because Brooks was a racist, yeah, but he was an expansive and inclusive kind of a racist. Like he didn't save violence just for white people. Like he would attack black people all the time, shoot at them, beat them and things like that. So a very tolerant and inclusive kind of evil murdering racist that he was. And earlier that day, he had attacked his girlfriend who was not white and got in an altercation. And then when King Kirby came up and said, you got to stop this, you got to get out of here, the police are coming, he runs. And remember, he was out of jail, which he shouldn't have been out of jail, for charges that were still pending, that shouldn't have been pending because the trial should have already occurred. And he knew if he got picked up, that's probably it for him. He goes away and he goes to this parade. So to me, he didn't pre-plan this. And in his mind, I guess he thinks that means it's not intentional, but of course that's not true. What he did was intentional. So he gets into this parade and he starts running over people. And I guess the question is, what evidence is there that he only ran over white people on purpose there and dodged other people, or statements that he would have made that said, well, when I got there and I saw all these white people, I decided I better run over them. Like, what is the evidence that connects when he gets there and commits these murders that he wouldn't have done it if the people hadn't been white, and that he did do it because they were white? I didn't hear that evidence. Now, maybe it exists and it wasn't part of the case, but given that he didn't confess, I don't know that it does exist. It probably doesn't exist. So if the prosecution had put this into play, this race thing, they would have had to go back to his former social media postings and try and bring this together and peer into his mind at those particular moments when they were already trying to argue that this wasn't intentional at the time it was occurring. They would have muddied up their case and created a potential difficulty there. For what? For a few more years added on? So based on the evidence I saw, yes, he was a racist. Yes, he's a violent idiot. But I can understand and respect their decision to not go for this hate crime adder at the state level when they had all the charges they needed, and it just would have made their cases muddier. Again, if he had done a Roof and said, hey, listen, look at my blog where I said I'm going to go out to this Christmas parade today and seek revenge, and then today, not just generally, and then also, by the way, I did do it for that reason. I did run over just white people because I hate them and I wanted to strike back. He didn't say those things, but Roof said those things. So the cases are different in that regard. Now, I'm not trying to gaslight you that I think that the hate crime legislation is applied equally or whatever. I am saying there are good reasons to not have applied it here, that it may not have met the definition of that, even if he were a racist, even if his victims did happen to be of one race, that you have to have, at that moment, to connect those things, evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. You may believe it beyond a reasonable doubt. It could even be true, but what's the evidence of it? And so why add that? Why add that to the case? I get why they wouldn't. However, I'm not blind to what's going on either. And when I watched this Halderson sentencing, I listened to the DA talk about the lack of mitigating factors and this is the guy that he murdered his parents because he wasn't going to the school and didn't have a job that he lied about to them, murdered them, dismembered them, put them in the fire, spread their parts throughout the woods. That's what he did to his parents. And one of the things that the DA said is, hey, it was a white guy with a life of privilege. And I listened to that and I'm thinking, what in that world are you talking about?
By pretty much every measure, he was a white male who had a childhood of privilege.
First of all, it's maybe a little offensive these days that if your parents manage to bring you up in a home where you aren't starving to death, that's considered privilege. That's privilege. And the second thing is, in terms of sentencing somebody, why would you mention anyone's color in a case where they murdered their own parents, dismembered them, burned them, and spread them out? Like, hey, don't feel sorry for him and give him anything light here, Judge, because he's a white guy. That to me is like a reverse racism. Or would you say the opposite? Would you say, what if the DA had just mentioned at all that he's black, Your Honor, or he's Asian, or he's Hispanic? What's that supposed to mean? If for a black person, you're supposed to say, well, he's black. I mean, I guess sometimes they kill their parents and eat and burn them, right? No, I mean, it's not relevant at all. It wasn't relevant to the crime he committed or why he possibly would have committed a crime like that, what color his skin is. So for the DA to say a thing like that kind of does tell you that they view color as important in terms of the context of a crime and maybe to some degree how much punishment the person should get or even how culpable they are for having committed the crime. I think that's really unfortunate. In a crime, poverty or something like that, if it's theft or maybe even some drug dealing, poverty could be relevant there. The color of your skin, when the people you killed are your own parents, I can't see, any relevance to that at all. I mean, I grew up poor, way out in the country. Is that privilege? I don't know. We didn't have any money. And it didn't occur to me that, we're out here broke and penniless and super poor. So I guess if I want to murder my parents and dismember them and burn them, I'm not as guilty as a guy who was rich, right? It's just stupid. It's condescending and stupid. And I was surprised and disappointed when I read that or saw that. It didn't put it in the earlier videos because I think it's kind of enraging to hear that, to me personally, in an otherwise well-done case that they had. But it shows a little bit of a mindset there. And I think it does support the idea that officials in the law are looking at race in a way that isn't maybe to the level of the highest aspiration to equal justice that meets what I think, which is race can sometimes be relevant, but why are you always seeing it? You've got a case with a white guy and white victims who are his parents, and you're talking about how he's white in terms of his punishment. That doesn't make any sense to me. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. I don't think you should go easier or harder on anybody of any color who does what this guy did. Same thing with Brooks. Same thing with Roof. They should be responsible for the actions they did, the quality of their actions, which were evil and horrible, irrespective of the color of their skin. I'm sorry. I just think people should have the law applied to them without regard to the color of their skin. And they should abide by the laws of the nation without regard to the color of their skin. And I don't look at somebody and see the skin tone that they have and think, well, there's a person who can obey the law easier than someone else when it comes to violent crime or not. Isn't that racism? That's awful to see somebody and think that. And to me, therefore, awful to have it brought up in a sentencing context where the people were all the same race that were involved in the case, perpetrator and victims. So yeah, I see the pollution of that kind of thinking in what's going on with the law as well as politics. So the end of this is, if anybody's still watching and hasn't thrown something across the room or want to kill me or whatever, because I understand hate crime, whichever side of it you fall on, it involves some emotion. Look at the name of it, hate crime, right? It's not love fest, it's hate crime. So you're angry about it and it's not applied fairly and all that, which I agree with. All I'm saying is that, benefit of the doubt, in this case with Brooks, evil monster that he is, the state did a good thing, I think, in the evidence that we know about not trying to add this adder, because it wouldn't have gotten them any more really in terms of penalties. We didn't see this evidence of it. And if they had put that in there, it would have made race and his background with race and what he meant when he said this thing on social media, all would have been in the trial, his nasty social media postings and things like that. And I don't think it would have made the trial better. I don't think it would have provided any more healing to the community that did come together, right? People of every stripe showed up to testify against this nut, of every color testified against him. That whatever healing can be, it's best served by the way that they did handle the case and the way that the judge handled the case, and putting that in play in a situation like what existed there, I think wouldn't have helped that. I respect that you see it differently, particularly given the way the government behaves. If you do see it differently, I get that. And I also get that you could say, well, he's a racist and he didn't care about running over those white people, and he didn't care. He absolutely didn't care. Whether his motive was 100% color, 90% color, 1% or 0%, those people didn't matter to him. He also demonstrated people of other colors didn't matter to him either in the way that he treated them. He wasn't an activist in that sense. He just was a scumbag. And where he could be an equal opportunity scumbag, he was one. So that's what I have to say about hate crime. I wanted to show you. Sorry that it's hard to keep opinion, even mine, out of it, talking about it, but I did want to show you the statutes, a clear case of a hate crime, say in the Roof case, which people have brought up, and how that worked out and why they were able to successfully engage that in that case because of his own statements, and why maybe not a good idea in the Brooks case because of his lack of confession and therefore evidence tying a direct act to his previous racist views, I think kept the trial cleaner and better for everybody. That's my opinion on it. I'm going to leave this hate crime aspect behind, but I didn't want to dodge it because it's a very fair point, and people deserve to at least know what the law is on it. And hopefully I've given you that and didn't fog it up too much with my own opinions on it, emotional as they are, just like some of the comments I've seen. Thanks.